This LOS is explain the rationale for using price multiples to value equity, how the price-to-earnings multiple relates to fundamentals, and the use of multiples based on comparables. Multiplier models. The term price multiple refers to a ratio that compares the share price with some sort of monetary flow or value to allow evaluation of the relative worth of a company's stock. Some practitioners use price ratios as a screening mechanism. If the ratio falls below a specified value, the shares are identified as candidates for purchase, and if the ratio exceeds a specified value, the shares are identified as candidates for sale. Many practitioners use ratios when examining a group or sector of stocks and consider the shares for which the ratio is relatively low to be attractively valued securities. So what that's basically saying, let's look at the price earnings multiple, for example. So you're looking at very high PE. If you're looking for value stocks, you may not choose them. If you're looking for growth stocks, you may be selecting based on the PE. And within a certain industry or sector, you may compare the PEs relative to each other to find companies that are relatively undervalued or relatively overvalued. And not only that, one of the things you look at with regards to PEs is the historical average and the reversion to mean. And so is it relatively overvalued versus the long-term average, or is it relatively overvalued versus the long-term average? So some of the advantages of the multiplier models is that they're widely used, they're associated with stock returns, they're easily calculated and readily available, they're good for identifying attractive companies in an industry, and they're useful for time series or cross-sectional analysis. The disadvantages are differences in accounting methods reduce comparability, and multiples for cyclical companies are highly variable. So that reversion to mean is a little bit more difficult if they're a cyclical company and there's a highly variable multiple over time. Multiplier models. Now we're going to look at the relationships among price multiples, present value multiples, and fundamentals. So we're starting with the Gordon growth model, P0 equals D1 over R minus G. If we divide both sides by E1, the earnings in the next period, you can see that P0 equals over E1 equals D1 over E1 over R minus G. And D1 over E1, dividend over earnings, is the payout ratio. Okay? So you can see that the PE is inversely related to the required rate of return and positively related to the growth rate. That is, as the required rate of return increases, the PE declines. And as the growth rate increases, the PE increases. And that makes sense because, look, we're using a shortened form here for P as the payout ratio over R minus G. Just think what's happening with the denominator here, okay? As we increase G, we're decreasing the denominator, so we're going to increase the PE. If we increase the R, we're going to increase the denominator, and we're going to decrease the PE. So that's easy. Just think of numerator and denominator, what's happening to the R and the G, and I think you'll be able to answer any least likely, most likely questions that are asked in English. But again, I always like to write out the formula, draw my little arrows, and don't work out everything in my head. So the PE and the payout ratio appear to be positively related. This relationship may not be true, however, because a higher payout ratio may imply a slower growth rate as a result of the company retaining a lower proportion of earnings for reinvestment. So that's an important point. This phenomenon is referred to as the dividend displacement of earnings. So continuing with the multiplier models and the relationships among price multiples, present value models, and fundamentals, multiples based on comparables are grounded in the law of one price and take into account historical multiple values. In contrast, PE multiples based on fundamentals can be based on the Gordon growth model, which take into account future expected dividends. So this is a nice practice question to check your understanding. A price earnings ratio that is derived from the Gordon growth model is inversely related to A, the growth rate, B, the dividend payout ratio, or C, the required rate of return. Okay, this is a nice little question to practice. So you can see we've got our formula P0 over E1 equals D1 over E1, which is our payout ratio over R minus G. So we're looking for what is inversely related, okay? So the dividend payout ratio, if we increase the dividend payout ratio, we're going to increase the numerator. That's obviously going to then increase the P0 over E1. Okay, so that one doesn't make sense. And then, if we use the small p then for our payout ratio over R minus G, we're looking for what goes up to drive down the PE. Okay, so we know if we increase G, we're decreasing the denominator, so we're going to increase the PE. But if we increase R, we're going to increase the numerator, and we're going to decrease the PE. So it's not the growth rate. We know that the growth rate is directly related to the PE, and it's inversely related to the required rate of return. So just think of your formula, think of your numerator and denominator, what's going up and what's going down. These questions can be twisted to be most likely, least likely, inversely related, positively related. You can see we could get 4 different questions, based on a similar concept, but just phrased differently. Okay, so PE is inversely related to the required rate of return, R directly related to the growth rate, and the dividend payout ratio. Do another quick practice question here. An analyst gathers the following data about a company in order to estimate its price earnings PE ratio. Expected dividend payout ratio 40%, return on equity 15%, required rate of return 12%, and the stock's current market price. So the PE ratio is closest to A, 6.7 times, B, 13.3 times, or C, 20 times. Okay, we're going to do P over E1 equals D1 over E1 over R minus G. Okay, so those are the variables that we need. But again, we're looking for the G. G equals retention rate times ROE. So we have a retention rate. Expected dividend rate is 40%, so the retention rate is going to be 60%, and we have a return on equity of 15%. Okay, so G equals going to be 0.6 times 15, and that's going to give us 9%. Okay, so we've got our G equals 9. And what is our R? Our required rate of return is 12%. So we've got our denominator. What's our numerator? D1 over E1. Well, okay, we're going to have our payout ratio is given to us. It's here. It's our expected dividend payout ratio. So we've got the numerator 0.4. Okay, so this just becomes 0.4 divided by 0.03. If I just bring up my calculator then very quickly, 0.4 divided by 0.03, I'm going to have 13.3 times, so the correct answer is B. So a fairly easy question. Again, you have to know the formula. P0 over E1 equals D1 over E1, and that's the payout ratio, 0.4 over R minus G. They gave us the R, the required rate of return, so the little trick here is we had to calculate G. G equals retention rate times the ROE. Retention rate, we have the payout ratio, so the retention rate is 60%, and they were nice enough to give us the ROE. We didn't need to do anything with regards to the DuPont, so not too difficult a question. Here's a practice question, no calculations, just a bit of theory. What type of equity valuation model is most likely to be preferable when one is comparing similar companies? A multiplier model, B, a present value model, or C, an asset-based valuation model? I like this question because all 3 are right, but it's the typical CFA where one is more right, so it's most likely to be preferable, and that's where you need to be a little bit careful. So A is correct, although all models can be used to compare various companies. Multiplier models have the advantage of reducing varying fundamental data points into a format that allows direct comparisons. As long as the analyst applies the data in a consistent manner for all the companies, this approach provides useful comparative data. So very nice little question there. 2 more practice questions to finish this LOS. The first one, an analyst has gathered the following information for the Aisha Corporation. Expected earnings per share equals €5.70. Expected dividends per share equals €2.70. The dividends are expected to grow at 2.75% per year indefinitely, and the required rate of return is 8.35%. Based on the information provided, the price-earning multiple for Aisha is closest to A, 5.7, B, 8.5, or C, 9.4. This question is actually fairly easy. It's one of these where thinking, maybe I don't know what I don't know. Why is it so easy? Again, if you know your formula, P0 over E1 equals D1 over E1 over R minus G, Well, they're giving us expected dividend per share 270, and they're giving us the expected earnings per share 5.7. They're giving us the required rate of return 8.35%, and they're giving us the expected growth rate at 2.75%. So they're giving us all the variables. There was no sub-calculations here. And sometimes it's like, oh, what am I missing? Maybe this seems too easy. But in this case, it's run through the math. It's going to give you B 8.5. Really easy question. They've given you everything that you need here. And again, always write out your formula first and then check and double check. Sometimes there's a sub-calculation required. In this case, there was none. Nice little easy question. And one last practice question to finish this LOS. The primary difference between PE multiples based on comparables and PE multiples based on fundamentals is that fundamentals-based PEs take into account A, future expectations, B, the law of one price, or C, historical information. Okay, that's a nice question to end on, a nice theoretical question. So A is correct. Multiple based on comparables are grounded in the law of one price and take into account historical multiple values, okay? In contrast, PE multiples based on fundamentals can be based on the Gordon growth model, which takes into account future expected dividends. So that's important. The primary difference between PE multiples based on comparables, PE multiples based on fundamentals, is that fundamental-based PEs take into account future expectations because we're talking about a PE multiple based on fundamentals, based on Gordon growth, and we can see that's D1 over E1, which is taking into account future expected dividends and payout ratios. And that's the last slide for this LOS. Thank you.